All right, everybody, thank you very much for joining the session today. We really appreciate everyone's time. Today, we're talking about a really interesting subject, which is org splits, clones, and mergers. So if you've ever been through an org split or an org clone or a reboot of your org, you know that it can be a really intensive process that can be really tough to negotiate. So we're here today to kind of give you some guidance on that, talk to you about some best practices, talk to you about some of the gotchas that you have to look out for, and also to talk about our approach on how we tackle org splits, clones, and reboots for Salesforce. So with that, our approach really is a tools-based approach. We've developed a set of proprietary tools called Snapshot. And this tool is really an org management solution that deals with a lot of the problems that you have with Salesforce orgs as they grow and as they become more complex. And we feel that this approach is really the best way to address an org split or an org clone. The traditional approach for large consultancies is to throw the clone to a lot of bodies who then manually crawl around the org and rebuild it manually. We feel that the tools-based approach has some significant advantages. So one thing that we've done is automate a lot of the processes for doing an org split or an org clone. And that automation gives us consistent results. It eliminates the human error and it gives you consistent results when you're performing a lot of those functions. It also greatly lowers the cost of doing an org split or an org clone. Rather than paying for resources, lots of them, to do a lot of work, you can work with a much smaller team and a dedicated set of tools that automate much of the process, and then that really gives you a big cost savings. Which also gives you time savings as well. A lot of these processes that we automate with the tool can be done in a much more time-efficient way than trying to do them manually. Some of them, the processes manual, are incredibly time-intensive. And so the last thing is, we do all of this with our tools from a visual interface that really is kind of a drag and drop environment, lets you do this from a UI rather than having to work with code or XML or things like that as well. So that's really our approach. And, this really talks about some of the things that we do that really directly address doing org splits, clones, and so forth with our tools. So one thing, of course, is metadata deployments. We've really optimized our deployments for this use case. Rather than forcing you to go through a repo or a code repository, which is an extra layer of time and complexity, we really have an org-to-org approach that saves you time and lets you get right to the heart of what you're trying to do. As part of that, we also do relational data migration. So, rather than moving data and then having to reconnect everything, relational data migration maintains all those child-parent relationships on a move. And then we've layered a lot of great features on top of that. We can do field mapping, value changing. We can create external IDs to prevent duplications. So a lot of the problems that you come up with moving data to a new org, we really tackle and address. We also have the ability to use developer projects where you can actually consume and work with metadata locally on your machine en masse. So that's really a nice piece that can help you when you're doing these projects. We have really great detailed metadata comparison tools. They're visual, they break down at a high level all the way down to a low level. And when you're syncing up orgs, when you're doing a split and making sure that everything moved over correctly, those are really key. We have great impact analysis. This is taking any piece of metadata and looking at all of the dependencies for it. What's referencing it, what it's referencing, where is it being used, so to speak. And we really have an excellent impact analysis. A lot of other solutions use the dependency API for Salesforce, which supports less than 100 metadata types. We've built our own dependency API on top of Salesforce that supports thousands. So it's a very comprehensive look at the impact of the changes that you're going to be making with your metadata. And lastly, I just want to mention our professional services. Our tools are great. We sell them, and lots of people do org splits, clones, and reboots with them. We also have a turnkey services organization, and this is all we do. We do org splits, clones, and reboots, and we do tech debt cleanup. We don't do anything else. That is literally what our services organization is dedicated for. And for lack of a better term, we eat our own dog food, meaning that when we do an engagement for a customer, we're using our tools. And that means that we're doing it more accurately, more efficiently, faster and at a much better price point than you will see with traditional consultancies. So, as you're going through the session today, if you think the tools, you would like a turnkey approach rather than using the tools and doing the clone or split yourself, we have a great service for that. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bill. Bill's going to take us through the ins and outs of org clones and reboots. We're going to learn a lot here, hopefully, and you're also going to see a lot of our approach on how to tackle the problem. So with that, Bill, off to you, sir.
All right, thanks a lot, Tom. Let's get into it. What are we talking about? The difference between an org split, a clone, or a reboot. So in an org split, imagine that you have maybe the sales division and the marketing division sharing the same Salesforce org. And over time, they're kind of stepping on each other's toes. They want to have separate, different types of customizations. That's an opportunity for an org split. And so for an org split, you might move all the metadata to a new org, and then some of the data and some of the users. So, Monday morning arrives and all the marketing people log in, and now they're in their new org. All the sales people log in, now they're in the old org. So that would be an org split. What do we mean by org clone? Well, imagine you have an office in London, and now you're getting ready to open an office in Australia. And Australia has a different regulatory environment. And so that would be an opportunity for an org clone. You're going to take that existing Salesforce instance from London, duplicate the metadata, but then you're not going to move any of the data or the users into that new org. And the reason is, you're going to hire new people in Australia. Those are going to be the users. They're going to go get their own sales and accounts. That's going to be the data. Now, of course, you're going to move some data into that org. Opportunity products, skills, documents, training materials, settings, things like that are definitely going to be moved. So I wouldn't say there's no data moved. Let's talk about an org reboot. An org reboot is often used where there's really bad technical debt. And a company says, look, we can't fix this org. We're just going to get a new org. We're going to move the good stuff to the new org, and we're going to start over. And that's the idea of a reboot, where you'd move all the metadata except maybe metadata with technical debt, all the data except maybe data with technical debt, and then all the users to the new org, and you're going to throw the old org away. I want to drill into the org reboot scenario just a little bit. So it might be that you can go without the reboot and you can fix the technical debt in place. And our Snapshot tool set is really good at that. So through the release management process, you can chip away at the technical debt and reduce it, and get that org agility back, get that data quality back, and all the things that you need for your org to operate properly. So that's the top scenario here. Fixing the technical debt without a reboot. So the next scenario here is really, in my mind, what I think of as the classic reboot, where you get a new org, you copy the good stuff that you can find into the new org, and then you test it extensively and you move everybody over to the new org. The only thing I don't like about that is that it is a new org. You're going to potentially lose some of your customization, some of your intellectual property, some of the valuable things in your old org. And it's just, it's all mixed up with the technical debt, and well, what can you do? You just have to give up some of that stuff. So I don't really think that's the best practice. I think this is really the best practice here, the last example, where you've got an org with a lot of technical debt, you do a split of that org, and then you conduct massive cleanup on the split and put that through user acceptance testing. So for me, that would be the best practice. No matter what you do, though, you got to think about technical debt when you're doing org splits, clones, and reboots. It could be that you're getting ready to split the org. It doesn't make any sense to copy the technical debt into two places, so maybe you want to clean it up first and then split it. Whatever you do, you need to think about technical debt when you do an org split, clone, or reboot. All right, what are we talking about today? Doing an org split, clone, or reboot, you're really going to have 4 major steps involved. Now, the first step is you want the source org and the destination org to be as similar as possible. So, think about if you're getting ready to paint your dining room. Before you paint, there's a whole bunch of setup work. You've got to mask out all the trimming and remove the fixtures and all of that. If you just haul off and paint, you're not going to get good results. And that's kind of what this first step is like. You want to make sure that the source org and the destination org are the same type of org, have the same licenses, and that your users have the same permissions. Everything's the same. And some of that can be done with metadata, but a lot of that's got to be done in the setup menu. So we're going to talk about that. So after the orgs are as similar as possible, you want to move all your metadata from the source to the destination. Now, sometimes you're going to move your metadata to the destination, and then you're going to customize both orgs after that. So it's really hard to come up with the user experience when you're architecting metadata. I think the best practice is move all the metadata, verify that with tooling, and then make adjustments to the user experience with the setup menu. I think that's probably the best practice there. After you've moved the metadata, you can move the required data from the source to the destination. And as we've talked about, sometimes that's all the data, sometimes that's none of the data, special pieces of data, whatever it is that based on your use case you want to move. And lastly, you're going to have user acceptance and the user transition. So at some point, you're going to deactivate some of those users in the source org and activate some of those users in the destination org. And then, Monday morning, that team comes in and logs in, and now they're in their new org. And hopefully there shouldn't be too much disruption after that. So now I want to talk about a customer checklist that we've developed. And so if you're an SI watching this video, this would be the questions you ask your customer. If you're Metazoa and we're doing this for a customer, these would be the questions that we ask the customer. If you're an admin doing your own org split, clone, or merge, then these would be the questions you need to ask yourself, because somebody really needs to go through this checklist. It's got some pretty important information here. So one thing to look at is whether you're using portals or communities. So portals are the old thing that you can't move it with metadata. It's got to be done manually. Communities are the new thing that's more lightning friendly, and it can be migrated very effectively with metadata. Another thing to think about is managed packages. Do you have a bunch of managed packages? Do you have access to the latest version of those packages? There can be a scenario where if you have an old managed package that you cannot locate, and its code and assets are sprinkled throughout your org, that's not good, because you can't migrate the package to the new org, and then you're not going to know that the code is hidden from you. So that's kind of a difficult situation. So be sure you can locate and find all of your packages. Do you have private reports? They can't be migrated with metadata. You've got to move them to a public folder, migrate that, and then move them back on the destination. Are you going to have to divide up Apex classes? It's really hard to do that, and it gets into scripting and coding, and you've got to figure out which Apex goes to which org and so forth. It's another good reason to do an org clone to duplicate all the metadata and then customize after that. Territory management, it's complex. History objects can't be copied, can't be created. What's your plan for history objects? Old Salesforce features, this is another problem. If the source org is old and has certain features turned on, it may be that those features are no longer available on the destination org, and that's going to be a source of differences between those two orgs. User migration, you need a plan for sure to know, which users are going, which are staying, and which users are going to be admins in the new org and have other responsibilities. External IDs help you so much with data migration. You're going to need them on the destination org. You can also put them on the source org if possible. Marketing Cloud, Pardot, is a hassle to migrate, and we use a special consultant or something for that situation. Chatter, difficult to migrate. It's kind of ephemeral too. So do you really need that chatter in the new org? Converted leads, difficult to migrate. Do you really need your old converted leads in the new org? Audit fields like created date, created by, last modified date. You can move created date and created user. Moving last modified date and last modified user is almost impossible. Integrations, do you have back-end server-side integrations? And the source org, that's something that your customer is going to have to handle on the destination org. So this is just kind of a checklist we go through to level set on potential problems, and it might change your strategy when you run into some of these issues. Manual setup tasks. So a bunch of everything can be handled with metadata and metadata migration. There's also quite a few issues that must be done manually in the setup tab. And what I like to do is get the source org on the left and the destination org on the right. And so you can kind of, in sequence, go through setup issues and make sure that all those checkboxes are the same on both of those. Things like multi-currency, person accounts, once you turn those on, you can't turn them off, and they need to be the same on both orgs if that's your intention. History tracking, Salesforce knowledge, org-wide email addresses. These are all things that need to be handled with the manual setup tab, and you need to do it before you get started with metadata migration. Okay, user synchronization. I think this is a really big issue. If you think about it, here's what you're going to have. You're going to have the source org and a designated source user. And that source user, you're going to use that user to get all the data and the metadata out of the source org. And then on the destination org, you're going to have a designated destination user. And you're going to use that user to put all the metadata and data into the destination org. So those two users are really important. For one thing, I'd put the word source and destination into the username so that you don't get them confused. You probably don't ever want to make any changes to the source. All your changes will be made on the destination, and you're going to copy all the metadata to the destination. So thinking about these two users and synchronization is really important. You need to be sure that the source user and the destination user have all available licenses. So if you have, feature licenses, package licenses, certain Salesforce product, permission set licenses, whatever you have on the source, that source user needs them all. If they don't have them all, you're not going to be able to see certain things to copy. The destination user needs all of the identical licenses. They have to have them all, or they can't write the information to the destination. They won't be able to see certain things. They won't have access rights to it. Same is true of permissions. So, don't try to do an org split or merge or clone without all available permissions for those two users, because if you don't have the permissions, you can't see certain things, not going to be able to read it off the source, not going to be able to copy it to the destination. So users are kind of weird. They're kind of a shade of gray. They're not really data. They're not really metadata. Users are in your data with like the owner ID and last modified, created by. Hundreds of different fields and places are user references in the source data. They're also in the metadata. Users appear at about 50 or 60 different spots in metadata, and you just have the raw username. So this is really important. You need to map the source users to the destination users correctly, so that all of the same people have the same rights that you need in both, and also so that your deployments can go through. So just for example, what we like to do is put up a big kind of list of, on this guy on the source is the equivalent of this guy on the destination, and go down the list. And, that way you'll know how to map, especially the metadata. The data is not so hard if you're using external IDs. The user is really just another data object for data. So complete user mapping is required. Okay, those are all my setup steps for getting ready to paint the dining room. And now what I want to talk about is metadata. And we're going to talk about this quite a bit. So you're likely to have millions of metadata assets on the source org. And there's 240 different types of metadata, but there'll be multiple copies of any given type. These 240 metadata types are connected to each other with dependencies. There's over 1,000 dependencies between metadata types. So you may have tens of millions of metadata dependencies on that source org. And so what you need to do is you need to copy all the metadata off the source to the destination. And so let's say we want to copy this asset here in the green circle, asset 1. And we're going to copy it to the destination. And we do, and we get an error. And the metadata API says, no, asset 1 references asset 2. And I don't know anything about asset 2. It wasn't in your deployment, and it's not on the destination. So, okay, so one fix for that is to select both asset 1 and asset 2 and migrate both of those to the destination. And of course, it's very likely that at that point, the metadata API is going to say, well, no, wait a second, asset 2 is talking about asset 3, but that wasn't in your deployment and it's not on the destination. So I don't know anything about asset 3. And so this is stopping you from doing deployments with all these dependencies. And the truth is, if you start with any asset and trace out all the dependencies, you'll come to a deployment boundary for that asset, which is everything that it's related to and the stuff that it's related to and so on and so forth. And you have to move them all together. And so you're like, all right, Bill, I found the deployment boundary. I know all the assets that are related. I'm going to move them all together. But you can't do that because about a quarter of the assets are going to have some other associated secondary deployment error. So there's going to be some other problem, you know, the dependencies aren't a problem, but there's some other problem with a license, with a permission, with a record type, you know, some other type of issue. And you have to work through all those issues. So as kind of a veteran engineer, I will tell you, this is one of the most profoundly difficult software problems I've ever seen. This is the fundamental limitation of the Salesforce platform that is directly responsible for technical debt, is directly responsible for the lack of agility in being able to dupe orgs and, you know, copy them, you know, the pieces of them anywhere you want. It's why change sets doesn't work very well. It's a big, big problem. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to work on this problem, and we have a really nifty solution. The solution is called shell assets. And shell assets are a specially constructed copy of every one of the regular metadata assets. It has all of the naming convention correctly, but it's not dependent on anything. And because it's not dependent on anything, you can copy them over anywhere you want. They always deploy, they're independent, and you can move them anywhere. Now, of course, they're not the real asset, but they have all the correct names. And what this does is it populates the destination namespace. So now, essentially, all the dependency problems are gone. And now you can pick them off one at a time with the secondary deployment errors. You can, you know, resolve those one at a time. You can move these one at a time. You don't have to do gigantic deployments. And so this is the method we use for moving all of those destination assets to the destination org and getting a true metadata clone for those assets. And I'll show you this live here in a little bit. So this is an interesting list. Kind of interesting to think about. On the left-hand side are the least dependent assets available. Things like static resources and documents. You can move those anywhere. They don't refer to anything. You can always move them. It's never a problem. The things on the right are the most dependent assets in the metadata API. And so if you were going to try to move all of this stuff, you'd move the stuff on the left first, because that's easy. And then you try to, you know, chip away at moving all of the stuff on the right and getting past all of the dependency problems and all of the secondary deployment errors and see if you couldn't get the org cloned. But with shell assets, all that stuff on the right is as easy to move as the stuff on the left, and you can just move it all over and then worry about the secondary errors at that point. Okay, I have a caveat emptor, which is buyer beware. What you want to accomplish is a true metadata clone. And that's going to preserve your customizations. You're going to be able to verify that this new org, yes, is exactly like our old org, and it's going to be future-proof. You're not going to have new problems crop up that you weren't aware of. There might be problems in the old org, but there'll be the same problems in the new org, and so no surprises. What a lot of people mean when they say that they're going to clone your org, or they say that they're going to do an org split, is a fake metadata clone. And what they mean is they're going to monkey around with the destination org until it gets past your approval process. And this is going to mangle your customizations. It's going to be kind of a Frankenstein style org that maybe it does get past your approval process. Maybe it goes on for so long you finally give up, or you kill the project, or whatever, but you're guaranteed you're going to have future problems with that fake metadata clone. So my advice is, if somebody says they're going to clone your org, if they say they're going to split your org, ask them how. And if they don't have a convincing answer, then beware, because you're going to be in for a world of hurt. And it's going to take much longer than you think, and it's maybe not ever going to work. And the root cause of that is they don't know what they're doing. All right, so we're moving on to the live demo. So here's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you our impact analysis engine, which is really cool and super useful for any type of technical debt or org split or merger type activity. Going to show you administrative deployments. It's very different than DevOps deployments. Administrative deployments are very rapid and quickly re-architecting an org for technical debt removal, org split, clone, merge. Going to show you some of the metadata differences and how org settings can result in differences and what to do about that. Then I'm going to look at a layout of a typical snapshot screen and show you how I would set it up for an org split or clone. Show you what you can do with developer projects, show you what you can do with shell assets, and maybe say a few things about data migration. All right, so hopefully you're seeing my screen here. This is our snapshot product. I have just a simple layout here. You can drag these onto the desktop and set up all of your orgs for whatever the purpose is. This has been set up for an org split or clone. I'm going to show you our impact analysis engine first. So this is really useful for seeing how all of your metadata is connected. So you see I've selected an Apex class, and now there's kind of a one-time cache, and then I can view all of the things that are connected to this Apex class. You can see there's a test class that calls the class. There's an Apex page that references it, and the Apex page is being called by a group of 4 custom sites. You can go the other direction and see that this Apex class calls this page, and this page calls 3 other Apex components and pages and classes, and so on and so forth. So you can literally browse through all of the dependencies and the structure of your org. So if you're trying to figure out if you can delete something, if it's technical debt, if you're trying to figure out if you can deploy it or why you can't deploy it, this is a great place to come to kind of deep dive into the assets. One of the things you can do here is you can export the job list, put that directly into our deployment tools, and also export this as a picture for meetings or so forth. I want to go back and show you one other thing. Let's look at a custom application like Lightning Sales. So this is really interesting. So you can see that the app menu calls our custom application, and the custom application calls all kinds of other stuff. Custom objects, custom tabs, flexi pages, profiles, and you can break all of these different components out and literally browse through all of them. So like custom objects group of 3, let's look at the account object and go here. And now you can see everything related to the account object, which is an absolutely huge amount of stuff. So this really lays bare the complexity of your org, lets you understand it, and is great for troubleshooting. All right, that's the impact analysis report. This report works with all 240 metadata types and all 1,200 relationships between them. Okay, I want to show you something else. I want to show you an administrative deployment. So if you have two orgs connected with an arrow, you can move metadata between them. And so this is my deployment engine. I'm going to move an Apex class and an Apex page from the source to the destination. I also need a permission set. Let me find that real quick. I'm going to move this permission set as well. I go next, and there's nothing to delete here. And so now we're going to try the deployment. Now, if you're doing an org split or clone, a lot of deployments can fail because you're kind of experimenting. You're trying to find the right combination of assets that you can move from the source to the destination. And so we see that my deployment has failed. Why is that? Well, look at this. It says case.isSelfClosed is not found. So this is a case where I have a standard field that is not available on the destination. Now, standard field, you can't move it. You can't delete it. It's standard, it's built in. And so what I could do is I could go to that destination org or the source org and maybe change a setting and get that to magically disappear. Sometimes that's not feasible though. And so we have an ability to just right click this and say, remove the reference. And when we do that, it adds it to the list of removed references right here. And so we can see that that's been added to the list. And so now that won't be included in the deployment. Now let's validate the deployment again. Now a new error. Bill object _C does not exist. Now in typical fashion, the metadata API is not telling you what that is. It just tells you there's something named that doesn't exist. And so what we could do is we could search for the asset type, and it's probably a custom object, isn't it? And it will add it right here to the list, to the create job list. And now we can do the deployment again. And so in this fashion, you can see I'm doing lots of deployments. I'm doing them very quickly. I'm not even leaving the interface, and I'm interactively discovering things that need to be included in the deployment. And now I've got another error. Bill comp _page does not exist. So one thing I could do is I could right click that and search for the asset type. It's a lightning bundle. Another thing I could do, does not exist or is not a valid override for action edit. What does that mean? So I could select that and search Stack Exchange. And sure enough, some poor soul has already found this error and will tell me all about it right there. So this is one way to do a deployment. I want to show you another way, and another way to use our deployment tools that I think is pretty interesting. Let's go back to here and get my get my original deployment together. So I've got Apex classes and Apex pages. I can right click here and say, add the related items. And once again, what this does is it goes back into our dependency engine, looking at the impact analysis. And what we can see is that this Apex class and this page are related to another page and two custom objects. But I can trace out this deployment boundary by clicking this purple arrow and say, what's this stuff at the right related to? And the stuff at the right is related to these items. And we see there's a static resource and a flexi page and a lightning bundle. So let's include those in the deployment. But what are those related to? And we can look even farther and we see, they're just related to one asset. The gray circle means it's already on the destination. The red triangle means it's different on the destination, and the green plus means it's not available on the destination. So you can see what this is showing you very quickly. And if we go even farther, we see that's the end of the deployment boundary. So let's click OK and go to the Deploy tab and try to deploy this. Should have had a joke ready. and there the deployment goes through. And so you see what I did. I had some assets I wanted to move. I traced out the deployment boundary, and I was able to deploy them with no trouble. So this really shows, trying to do something like this with DevOps tooling is darn near impossible. You will really be frustrated. You don't want to have to go to Git. You don't want to merge any XML. You just want to hammer that destination org, get all of these changes over there. And then, of course, you care about the difference between, where you started and where you ended up. But all the steps it took to get there don't really matter. You're re-architecting that org. So that's administrative deployment. Now, while I'm right here, I want to show you something I think is pretty interesting. I took a scratch org over here, and I took another scratch org over here. And in the first scratch org, I turned on multi-currency. So let's look at the metadata differences between these two orgs. And what you'll see is that the difference is all the same. Each one of these objects has a field for the multi-currency on the left, and the org on the right doesn't have multi-currency turned on. Now, of course, one way to, so this is not good, because now I can't deploy any of these objects to the destination because it doesn't have that standard field. And I couldn't also deploy the destination to the source for the same reason. You can't delete it. And so this is a kind of a permanent difference in these two orgs. And the difference is because of the setup menu. I turned on multi-currency on one of them and not on the other one. So this is a really simple example of where the settings matter. And you don't want to see all these differences. They stop deployments, and they also complicate the different, when you run these reports to show you all the differences, you're going to get all these differences that maybe you don't care about. So I'm going to show you in a minute how to deal with that. But I just wanted to I thought this was useful to kind of show you how the settings in an org can lead to differences, in this case, multi-currency. All right, so now I want to show you kind of the setup that I like to use for doing an org splitter clone. So I've got the source org over here. So the source user, see my split source user at metazoa.com, takes the snapshot for the source org. Now, notice that I put the source org all the way over here on the left-hand side of the screen. That's so it's going to be quite difficult for me to connect anything to it, because I don't want that source to ever be a destination. It's only a source. I don't want to change my source org. I only want to change the destination org. Now, the destination org is over here, and you can see this guy is the split destination at metazoa.com. So I've got in my usernames now, I've got the source, I've got the destination, keep it all clear. Everything in Snapshot goes from left to right. That's for a purpose so that you don't make mistakes. And then I've got a sandbox here. And so what I'm trying to do with this deployment arrow right here is move stuff from the source metadata to the destination sandbox. Why a sandbox? Why not just move it into the real destination? There's two reasons for that. So one reason is, if I go into a deployment, a sandbox will allow me to change everything possible and ignore errors. A production org will not. So that's a good thing about a sandbox. Another good thing about a sandbox is that you don't have to run the code coverage. So that's another good thing. You get into these big deployments, the code coverage can take a long time. So let me just give you an example deployment here. So here I've got a bunch of custom objects I want to deploy, and I can right click and show. So as I said earlier, custom objects in red are different, custom objects in green are missing, and custom objects in gray are the same on the source and the desk. So one thing I can do is bring up an asset filter to only show missing and different assets. And when I do that, it makes it a lot easier to see these are the things I need to move. You could just leave that asset filter on. Let's move them all, and let's go to try to deploy them. And we're going to get a bunch of errors because all of these assets are dependent. They're intertwined with other things in the org. I'm going to get a whole bunch of dependency errors, and I may also get secondary deployment errors. And you see, those are all the errors here, right here, that came up trying to deploy those. So Another thing I want to mention just while I'm right here is you can apply data transforms. So these are really simple data transforms. Make the split source user into the split destination user. Your user transform is probably going to be a lot more complex than that, but that's where you put it. All right, so I couldn't deploy all of my objects here onto the destination. Now, I want to show you the purpose of these two developer projects here. So the things in blue are connections to live orgs, but the things in teal here actually are folders on my computer with the metadata in the folder. So one thing I like to do, here's these source files. Let's look at these files, is I can actually, here's my custom objects. You can actually go in and edit this XML. It's not very hard. For example, remember when we had the multiple currency fields that were, complicating the comparison and everything? Those could all be removed from these objects, edited out. Any good text editor will let you edit multiple files at the same time. You can strip all that stuff out of there, and then when you do a deployment from here, you won't see those complications. So developer projects are a great way to build kind of a synthetic source. In other words, it's as if the source org was this way, but we've cut out multi-currency, or we've cut out shield platform encryption, or some other major feature that you don't want on the destination. And so now we can just do our deployments from here and do that. So the other thing I wanted to show you is here is our shield here is another developer project where I've set up shell assets. And I want to show you what the deployment experience is like for that. So if I bring up this project, you can see I have all the same objects over here at left that I wanted to deploy. And now when I deploy them, I was able to deploy all of the custom objects in this org in one deployment because they're shell assets. They're never going to cause a deployment error. You can deploy them one at a time. You can deploy them all at once. Now, of course, it's not the real object, but what it does is it populates the destination namespace. And so now Salesforce says, hey, I have all those assets. I don't need to worry about dependencies. There's no dependency problems. All the assets are already on the destination. And what that lets you do is come back in phase 2 and go for your real deployments and move the actual assets in. So it's a 2-step process, but it gets rid of the dependency problems. And last thing I want to talk about is just our data migration. Talk about this for just a few moments. Obviously, the data migration has got to go from the real source org to the real destination org. You might want to see the sandbox for testing, but that's what they've got to do. You can, build data sets, migrate data sets. One useful feature to be aware of is if you're managing data sets, first of all, look at how I've set up my data sets here at the left. See the little 001 underscore 002? I've done that on purpose because they're going to be in alphabetical order. And this lets me move them in series. So I can say, I'm going to move my accounts first, and then I'm going to move opportunities, which refer to accounts, then I'm going to move contacts, which refer to accounts, then I'm going to move things like campaigns, which refer to both contacts and leads. So it lets you kind of break your job up into multiple data sets. You don't have to do it in one gigantic data set. And the other thing I wanted to point out is you may not be aware of this feature, the external button over here. This thing's really cool. It'll let you automatically put external IDs into the source org or the destination org or the data set as if the external IDs were in the source org. So sometimes customers don't want you to touch anything in the source org, even put external IDs in there. So you can use this feature for that. And another tool I want to show you here is this overview button. What the overview does is it lets you look at either the source or the destination org, and it will build a comprehensive report of all of the object counts and properties in the source or destination, and all of the metadata counts and properties in the source and the destination. So that is as high a bird's eye view as you can possibly have of your orgs that you're getting ready to turn into for metadata migration or for data, metadata deployment or for data migration. All right, so that is my live demo, and I think we're ready to take a few questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. That was awesome. If you could, yeah, jump to that slide for me, that would be great. Thank you. So just to give everybody a quick heads up before we dive into the questions here, obviously, if you're interested in our Snapshot tool, we saw some parts of what it can do today and how it can help you with an org split or an org clone. It's on the App Exchange. You can search Metazoa or Snapshot and find it. We do free trials. We do training for trials. You can see all the ways on this slide to contact us. We'd be glad to talk to you about the tool. On the other side of the fence, some of you might have been a little mind blown by some of this today, and you just need an org split, but you don't want to go do the work yourself or have a consultant do the work. We have a great professional services team that, as I said, does this as a dedicated this is what we do. We don't do these write code and do these other things. We do splits, clones, reboots, and technical debt removal. And because we use these tools that you looked at today to do it, we can do it with a smaller team. We can do it faster, more accurately, and at a better price point than a lot of the traditional consultancies who, as I said, just sort of throw bodies at the problem. So if you're looking for an org split or clone or reboot and would like to have it turnkey, reach out to us and we'll be glad to scope it out for you and take care of you. So with that, we've got questions. If you have questions, by the way, as we're rolling here, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. And we've got maybe 5 minutes or so to hit as many as we can. So the first question is, I want to move a large volume of data object out of Salesforce. How do I find all the places it's used? You want to take that, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, it should be, I mean, the object name for the object will, if you just copy that in a data set, you'll get them all. But I think what you're asking is, how can you find all the things that reference those? In other words, like say, for example, attachments, the parent entity for an attachment, there can be a huge list of them. And you can do that through the describe information for that object. And the describe information will show you all of the parents. And as a matter of fact, in our data mover, if you just go to SOCL, the SOCL settings to with a little bit more advanced stuff, it'll show you both of those pieces of information. And also you can do that from Workbench with both the describe information and actually copying all the records is really easy to do with our with just the
Yep.
data, building a data set.
Yep. Thanks, Bill. So another one here, I'd like to start to separate metadata into packages. Is this the right tool to help?
Yeah, so great question.
You went right into Bill's wheelhouse here.
Yeah, that's a great question because really packages are the ultimate solution to technical debt and to moving your Salesforce org forward forever, while you're building new stuff here and you're decommissioning old stuff there. Package development is the answer. And having all of those assets as this vast sea of unpackaged metadata is not helpful. And even if your packages are bad or there's something wrong with them, they're independently unit testable, they're isolated, they can be removed very easily, they can be added very easily. So it's a great idea for another webinar. It's kind of beyond me answering all of that right now, but we have a ton of tools for package development. And it's super important. And also recommending Salesforce DX on the client, and those developer projects we showed you can directly be used by Salesforce DX. So yeah, that's a great new webinar. We'll have to do that.
And Charlie, who asked that question, feel free to reach out to the team, set up a demo. We can walk you. We could talk that on a deeper level. Is the tool good for sandbox seeding? And I'll take that, and the answer is yes. We have a lot of customers that do sandbox seeding. Obviously, we can seed with both metadata and data, but our data migration tool is great for that. Probably one of the biggest use cases of it is, repopulating a refresh sandbox with training data or development data or whatever it might be. So yeah, absolutely. We can also cover that in the demo for you.
Yeah, well, Tom,
Okay, so
add one thing to that.
sure.
So one thing to remember is when you build a data set, it's an immutable XML asset. So you can build it once and you can seed the sandbox forever with the exact same thing. Other thing is we have great data scrambling and masking capabilities that are very sophisticated. So you can, scramble social security numbers, but they're consistently scrambled so your developers can use them to, build applications on top of. So just thought I'd add that.
Great point, Bill. Question is, you're showing all these sources and how to use them. How do you create one? Did you use Snapshot? And I'll take that. The answer is yes. One thing we didn't really show at the beginning is when you drag on a blue icon, for example, to connect to an org, first real fundamental step of using the tool is taking what we call a snapshot. That's really a metadata picture or grab of all that metadata. So Bill obviously did that before the demo today, so we didn't sit there and watch him do it. Then he can just leverage that to do a lot of the things that you saw today. So yeah, Snapshot will definitely take care of that. We kind of have to do the work, right? Can we commit? Yeah, can we commit code to GitHub? And the answer is yes. Those teal icons that Bill was showing you, developer projects, could also be a repo. So while when you're doing an org split or clone, that might be an extra step you don't want. We can certainly do it. We can push and pull metadata from any flavor of Git. That's no problem. This is, I split org and copy metadata to another org. Isn't the technical debt copied over? And the answer is yeah. Unless you do an optimization or a cleanup phase before you do it, you're passing it along. However, as Bill, we didn't really get into it today. We have other webinars you can find on our technical debt analysis and removal. We have probably the best tools you'll find for really tackling and handling technical debt. So if you need to do that optimization phase, either pre or post split, we can definitely help you there. So here we got a few more. We're getting a little tight on time. You said that it was easy to move a community. Can you do one as an example? Not right now, since we're on tight time frame. But David, please reach out to us, set up a demo. We can walk you through it. Is this a solution in a cloud? The answer is no. We have a managed package that goes into your Salesforce org, and that Salesforce package acts like our cloud. It does authentication, it does sharing of deployments, it does logging, it does all those things that the cloud would do. And then our desktop app connects directly to your Salesforce orgs and directly to the orgs that you're working with. The advantage of that is we don't touch your stuff. We don't play middleman. We never have access to your data. We don't have access to your metadata. We don't have access to your credentials. So it's a zero trust environment. When you're using the tool, you're not trusting the vendor. We give you all that great capability that you have with the cloud, but your Salesforce org is the cloud and we're not in the middle. So the answer is no, but it acts like one and you get all the advantages of it. We just got to thank you guys because that was awesome. Thank you, Jody. Appreciate that. Does this tool rely on accessing Git branches? And the answer is no, but it could. What we showed today, we were connecting directly org to org. We don't force you to go through Git like a lot of other tools do. However, we can connect to Git, and if you want to use that as a source of truth, you certainly can. But we don't force it. We have more flexibility. And then is the tool available for trial? Absolutely. You see that right here on the screen. A 14-day trial available. We do training and support for the trial. You can go to the App Exchange and download it, start a trial, and set up training, and we'll take care of you. All right. I think that's it for our questions today. Hopefully this was really useful for everybody. We'd love to provide you great tools if you want to do the work yourself. If you're a little mind blown and want it turnkey, we have, I think, the best services organization you're going to find dedicated to doing this. So just reach out to us and, we can help you scope out your project. So with that, I want to say thank you to everybody for your time today. Really appreciate it. Hope this was useful for everyone. Bill, thank you. Jill, thank you. And we'll talk to everybody soon.
Bye, gang.